We're here to speak to three legislators about tax cut proposals. And first of all, let's get to what happened in the legislature today. It was an interesting evening or morning in the legislative hearings. There was one of the hearings dealt with a new state program that's being contemplated about how to identify children and adults with autism. There are several bills that are going to be contemplated that would provide money for teacher training to spot children with autism. Also, a program to identify ways to treat autism, and also provide vouchers to help treat people with autism. Essentially, it's advertised as a public-private partnership as a way to spend the state dollars most efficiently in the treatment of autism. Also, there was a rather interesting bill dealing with ways to cut down on gas flaring, natural gas flaring in western North Dakota. A great deal of our natural gas production is wasted because we don't have sufficient infrastructure set up to gather it and process it. And one of the ways to try to cut down on the amount of gas that's wasted is to encourage, through a tax incentive, the establishment of small processing plants at the wellhead. They're about the size of a semi-trailer. They can be used to make anhydrous ammonia and a number of other products, and that is a way that we could try to use more of the natural gas as it's intended, rather than just waste it and burn it up. In the meantime, we have three gentlemen here tonight that we're going to be discussing tax proposals. Some of them have introduced some. All of them have ideas, have heard ideas from constituents, have ideas of their own that we're going to talk about with them. First, we have Representative Scott Lauser from Minot. He's serving in his second session. He has a bill that he's introduced that would suspend the state income tax for 2 years. Welcome, Mr. Lauser. We have Craig Hedlund, who has a bill that essentially would preserve favorable tax treatment for dividend income and capital gains income as part of the North Dakota income tax. And we have Senator Jim Dotson-Rod. The two gentlemen I introduced previously, Mr. Hedlund and Mr. Lauser, they are Republicans. Mr. Dotson-Rod is a Democrat, and in the 1980s, Mr. Dotson-Rod, when the North Dakota Democrats controlled the Senate, and yes, there was a time when this did indeed happen, Mr. Dotson-Rod was the chairman of the Finance and Tax Committee, so he's extremely well-versed in the subject we're going to be discussing. Welcome, gentlemen.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Lauser, could you discuss your bill about the suspension of the income tax for 2 years and why you decided to put that option forward?
Well, there was a number of options. I had talked to a number of constituents, and one of the thoughts that was interesting to me was to take the tax rates to zero, rather than eliminate the tax, but take the tax rates to zero, which would allow for some of the carry forward credits and that sort of thing that people had been planning on. Over the course of discussion, it just came out that maybe this was a more palatable way to focus on the income tax and reduce the tax burden for the taxpayers in North Dakota. So we're looking at a 2-year suspension and then reevaluate this after we come back in 2 years.
You mentioned, can you explain a bit more the difference between just getting rid of the income tax or taking the tax rate to zero and suspending the income tax?
Well,
what's the difference there?
Taking the income tax to zero or changing the rates at all would be changing the law. In this case, it's just suspending what's already in law, and we would revisit this again in 2 years. And
why is that an advantage in your opinion?
Well, I think it's a way to, I would hope that it's a way to demonstrate to the legislature that perhaps this tax is not necessary in the future, a responsible way of doing that.
Do you have any idea how much the income tax raises in 2 years?
Well, I guess if we tried to project that 2 years ago, and we did, we'd be off because of the tremendous growth in the state. current projections are over $1 billion. So this is, I've heard anywhere from 1.1 billion to 1.4 billion in projected revenue over 2 years.
Of the state income tax.
Correct.
Oh, that's a lot of money, Mr. Hedlund. Your bill essentially preserves favorable treatment for investment income such as capital gains and dividends. Could you explain how that would work?
Well, what we've done with this bill, and let me start and preface this by saying the bill today in its current form really doesn't do anything because of what happened with the fiscal cliff negotiations in Washington. The reason I submitted the bill is because all the chatter coming out of Washington and the need for more revenue, the president stated publicly that he thought that dividends was one area he could increase revenue and that maybe they should be taxed as ordinary income. In North Dakota, we're flush with revenue. I saw no need for us to automatically have those increases put upon our citizens here in the state. So what we did is we drafted legislation that essentially, had they gone to that taxing of ordinary or dividends as ordinary income, we automatically would have followed. This would have prevented that, and as a compromise, somewhat of a compromise, the tax department came up with what they felt would have been a revenue-neutral proposal, and our dividend income would have been reduced by 20%, but it would have been expanded to all dividends. Our current law is just a 30% reduction on qualified dividends.
One of the things that resulted from the fiscal cliff resolution, so to speak, is there is still favorable treatment of dividends and capital gains, but the rate is higher. Does your bill keep that higher? I mean, does it mimic that higher rate?
Well, what it does is it does not. It keeps our current law in place, so our dividends will still receive that 30% reduction. Now, we did have the hearing on the bill today, and there was public support for the bill as it is, but a citizen did offer what he thought would be a favorable amendment that would essentially mirror what the federal government has done on the lower income end. Now, we're going to take a look at that, and I've got the tax department putting together exactly what the federal law has done, and then we will see if the proposed amendment that he would like to see fits our legislation.
So basically you would have less of a tax rate on capital gains and dividends if they're earned by someone who's making below a particular amount of money?
Yes, that's correct. And, I can't state what those income levels are because I have not read the federal legislation. But, yeah, I think what I understand is there would be a zero tax on those dividends and capital gains if you qualify, if you're in that range of income.
Could you just talk for a moment about why is it that dividends and capital gains, why, in your opinion, do they deserve a favorable tax rate?
Well, first of all, dividends and capital gains come from investment. Investment generally has been taxed at the level, the corporate level once, and then when it's passed on to the investor, it's taxed again. And, to tax it again as ordinary income, I don't think is fairness. I think it would discourage investment, and therefore I think history has shown when we have lower taxes on dividends and capital gains, revenues increase.
First of all, Representative Whelan, could you discuss for us how these bills came to be? We're talking about basically three bills. One of them would provide money to the Department of Public Instruction for money to establish a voucher program to provide treatment for children and adults with autism spectrum disorder. We also have a bill to provide money to the Department of Health and the Department of Public Instruction to provide teacher training so that teachers are better able to recognize and manage students with autism, and also to establish a registry of people who have autism as a disability so that we know how the extent of the problem we're talking about. And then there's also a bill to continue a study of the problem itself. And could you just tell us how these bills came to be, because you are familiar with the extended study that resulted in these proposals?
Well, thank you, Dale. The study was the interim study on human services. We studied not only the autism spectrum, but we also did some guardianship, and we did some other studies that were involved in there, but were, I think, a little more minor in comparison to the autism study. And we, as a committee, came out with the 3 bills. The first one, as you stated, is a continuation of the study, because we feel that we're just touching the tip of the iceberg on what the autism spectrum is producing. We're told that there are anywhere from 1 child out of 58 up to 1 child out of 110 that is born with the spectrum today. And if that's the case, that's a lot of kids, and so we need to be watchful of that and so forth. So the 3 bills, the other bill, and you mentioned both of them. One is to provide $198,000 to the DPI for providing information on how teachers and other people that work in the school system can deal with children and recognize when they have this situation. And then the last one, of course, is the grants program, which would provide some dollars for some treatment for individuals that have it.
I understand this voucher approach is fairly unique in the country. Could you explain a bit how this might work?
Well, it is kind of unique, and as far as I know, I think when Dr. Stanton was testifying, she did mention one other state that I think was doing it. I'm not sure if it was New Hampshire or Vermont.
And Dr. Stanton is an expert at Prairie St. John's in Fargo.
Yes, she is, and then she deals with autism. That is her area. And when she testified today, she did talk about that. It would provide services for up to the amount of money that's in there now could provide services for up to 150 people, and the cost is estimated to be somewhere around $27,000 to $30,000 annually. So there's a 2-year time frame in there, and so $4.50 is in the bill at the present time.
Essentially, Dale, the voucher system is a method wherein you have dollars available, and then the family decides where to get those services, and the state pays for the services. Instead of hiring state staff to provide these services, a voucher is essentially a family has the ability to go and buy those services wherever they want.
How do you think that approach is advantageous?
Well, I think it has the potential of being more creative. Different kinds of things might develop in different parts of the state, and families themselves have different points of view as to what works and what doesn't work. You know, autism is a type of disability where this year we will diagnose more people to have autism than AIDS, diabetes, and cancer combined. So it is really a phenomena that we need to address in creative ways. Now, it's not the only thing we can do. We can have public services outside the voucher system, but the voucher system is a potential way of letting families be more creative about where to get services and how to make sure their children have those services.
Senator Heckman, you're a classroom teacher.
Yes, I am.
I'm sure, well, I'm not sure, I guess, but I'm presuming that you probably have had children in your class who had autism. And
That's correct. I was a special education teacher for about 25 years, and in that time, probably even before the diagnosis came through, the ability to evaluate and place children in the correct category, I was serving children with autism, and I have since that time.
how difficult is it to discern whether a child has autism, and how useful is training going to be of a classroom teacher to spot the signs?
Well, actually, there's training out there right now. Some of the schools have teachers that are certified for teaching autism. The University of North Dakota has an autism certification program, and that they are sending out trained staff out to the schools in North Dakota and surrounding areas. The Department of Public Instruction does a lot of training. Autism doesn't have a specific category right now, so a lot of individuals who teach special education across the spectrum as far as speech and language, OT, a lot of people are involved with a student that has autism or a child with autism.
Could you talk about the challenges that are faced by trying to teach a child with autism? What is it about the spectrum that makes it more difficult for a child to learn?
Probably one of the most noticeable things for a lot of children on the spectrum is their inability to cope with the daily social skills that are needed. They have a lot of speech and language difficulties, communication skills. There is a wide range of disability levels on the spectrum. From very, very mild, there are many people out in the world of work today that have some characteristics of autism. And then there are some that are very severe, some children that are very severe and need more therapy than others do. But I always go back to the premise that every child has some abilities that they are good at. And that's one thing that I always looked for in the classroom, is find the abilities of the child and start to use that to work with their disabilities.
We have Representative Mark Owens from Grand Forks, a Air Force veteran who retired up here, and he's from L.A., Lower Alabama, and that's why he sounds the way he does, and you'll know exactly what I mean when he starts talking. He's a very erudite man, but he has that southern accent, so I'm sure that he'll impress you. And we have Mr. Jim Schmidt, Representative Schmidt from southwestern North Dakota, represents a rural district, and he's an expert on credit unions and water, not in that order. And we also have Mr. Jeff Olson, Vice President for Advocacy for the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, hi, Dale. Thanks for having us back.
Thanks, Dale.
One correction, Dale. I'm from Huff, south of Mandan, and that's the ski capital of North Dakota.
The ski capital of North Dakota.
Ski capital of North Dakota.
Indeed it is.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Well, gentlemen, I understand that we're talking. Well, you gentlemen have experience with credit unions as customers, and I'd like you to discuss those.
Yeah, well, thanks, Dale. I started with the Spokane Federal Credit Union in 1982 when I was transferred out to Spokane. I still belong to that Spokane Federal Credit Union. And then when I had the opportunity to move to Alaska in 1992, I joined the Matanuska Valley Federal Credit Union in Wasilla.
What was your employment at this time?
I worked for U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And what did you do?
I was in charge of doing water resource activities in Alaska and also in the state of Washington for USDA.
And so you were joining credit unions in your various postings on your USDA job.
Right. And see, when I got to North Dakota, then I joined the Capital Credit Union as well. And so what I find really good for me is that that's member-owned, member-operated, and we take care of ourselves. And it provides, to me, a sense of security knowing I've got one membership with one vote, and I can volunteer my efforts to the credit union and let my feelings be known. And I find value in that. And every one of those credit unions, all three that I've belonged to for a period of 30 years and down to about 10, has provided me with some simple options, which I didn't find in other places. So I enjoy that opportunity of that alternative.
What sort of options, simple options, are you referring to?
For example, a line of credit was really an easy thing. You could conduct it over the phone, and it's also over the internet nowadays with that. And in the early 80s, that was a real benefit. You just call them and say, I need some line of credit, especially for some of the businesses that I had. And that worked very easy, and it seemed to be more personable and easy access.
What sort of borrowing did you do at the credit union? I'm assuming you did some.
Yes, I did. For example, automobiles, and especially in Alaska, a lot of recreational vehicles and that sort of activity. We did a lot of skiing and that type of thing. And most of it was recreational. And so we never did borrow anything from real estate from that aspect, but most was recreational and cars and that sort of thing.
What did you think the interest rates were competitive, that the terms were competitive?
I thought there was, in some cases, they were lower.
Really?
They're actually lower, right? And some of those costs that are associated with loaning is actually lower in the credit union.
Did you run for the board ever, or were you ever director?
No, as a federal employee, I didn't want to get involved in that.
Did you even have that option as a federal employee?
I think it was there. It was, but I did a tremendous amount of traveling and so forth and so on, and so it was just easier for me not to do that, but depend upon those that were.
The first time you joined a credit union, why did you do it? Was it, close by, or did you have thoughts about the ownership structure of a credit union and how you preferred it to a bank, or how did that work?
It just seemed to be easier. It just seemed to be easier to get into it. And I like the idea of a lot of the people that I knew that were federal employees were part of that. And so I knew more individuals that were running it. And I say that since the membership is the running factor, then you actually basically knew the people that ran it.
Representative Owens, what was your first experience with a credit union?
As a member, over 30 years ago. And it was a matter of joining a credit union from the standpoint of generally credit unions started out, particularly that far back in the late 60s, early 70s, as what's called select employer groups, meaning you had to be a member of a group to join a credit union. So you were constantly in a credit union with people that had basically the same values or working toward the same things you were working, and people you knew day in and day out. And
or had the same job.
Exactly.
In the same business.
Exactly.
And what was your business?
Well, I was just getting into the military back then. Mm-hmm. So I was bouncing around from post to post, and now that's been made even easier through these networks with debit cards, where I can go to these different networks anywhere in the United States, even overseas, and I don't pay a ATM fee or anything because the credit union is associated with that network, and they've waived the fee, and it's just like having a branch of that credit union wherever I'm at.
Was the big attraction for you initially that these were a group of people that you shared a common bond with?
Well, certainly that knowing that everybody, it wasn't just anyone that could join and possibly take out, well, let's say bad loans and then, harm the financial institution that you had your money in. But it was also the fact that, as Jim stated, that you're one of the owners. You have a voice. You have a single vote. It doesn't matter how much money you've got in there. You have a single vote.
What sort of borrowing did you do at the credit union, and how easy was it to do?
It was very simple, actually. Throughout the years, over the years, it's been, vehicles and vacations, and I think there was one house at one credit union once. But generally, real estate loan is somewhat restrictive depending on the size of the credit union. The bigger credit unions, because generally what they want to do is they want to hold the paper themselves rather than sell it on the secondary market, so that you know who you're dealing with, even with your mortgage loan.
Mm-hmm. We got this great economy in North Dakota. Hey, some people say it's because of great management. Maybe it's because we got a bank in North Dakota. We started that baby in 1919, and all is well since then.
It's true. It's true. I actually asked that question of Eric Hardmeyer once. Eric Hardmeyer is the president of the Bank of North Dakota. And the question was, well, Eric, is it true that the Bank of North Dakota, by its existence, by its health, its profitability, its ability to recycle profits to the taxpayers of North Dakota, its ability to carry student loans, its ability to extend favorable credit to people who've been flooded out people who are looking to buy a farm, people who are looking to, get diesel truck driver training at one point.
Sure.
Can you take credit for North Dakota's prosperity? And Eric said, well, yes, we'd like to. I think that we're part of it, but is it all on our shoulders? Well, no. I think,
Sure.
In fact, a great deal of it is on the shoulders of the poor dinosaurs that died millions of years ago and are now yielding up their bounty to us for our own edification.
It's interesting. We've had these crises over the past decade, and we have used the Bank of North Dakota to write the big checks.
Yes.
So when the disaster check is in the mail from the federal government and takes weeks and weeks or maybe months, we write that check out from the Bank of North Dakota. That local community can get right to work.
When I moved to North Dakota, I was fascinated by the idea of a state-owned flour mill, a state-owned bank, and the fact that you could not buy a shirt on Sundays.
Uh-huh.
And there was you could gamble in the bars on Saturday night, but you could not buy a shirt on Sunday. You couldn't go to the grocery store either because they weren't open.
Well, you could, but the grocery stores were open but they were roped. Things were roped off.
Well, no, that wasn't true.
That was later.
That was later. That was later because back then I thought, you can't go to the grocery store, but you can gamble the night before. I thought that was very interesting, and also you have these blood red socialist institutions in North Dakota. I thought that was really interesting, and the Bank of North Dakota is. The more you learn about it, really, I think, the more interesting it becomes, and you really do think if everyone was starting from scratch, would all states have something like that? Because it isn't. It's a really a very efficient way of handling public funds.
It's very much of a clearinghouse too for all of the financial institutions.
Yes, it is.
So they all benefit some way by having sort of a neutral clearinghouse for financial transactions.
And you have situations which really in other contexts would sound bizarre. You have the banking industry going to the Bank of North Dakota and saying, will you please make mortgage loans in rural areas because we can't handle it, or there's too many rules, we can't deal with it, and giving away their own business to a state-owned bank.
Well, there's a great example where credit unions and banks can originate these loans or do the paperwork, service the loans,
yes,
and then the Bank of North Dakota would be the holder. So, I mean, it's a great partnership.
We've been speaking tonight to Senator Tim Mathern, who had a great story about how he joined a credit union with his duck earnings as a young man. And it's Jeff Olson, who's the Vice President for Advocacy for the Credit Union Association of North Dakota. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Dale.
Thank you very much.
That's it for the Legislature Today. We will see you tomorrow night.